And it'll start to identify how people use technology and what their general proficiency is, as well as their use patterns. Probably the most important part of that is at what frequency they use different tools, what they go to first, right? So if I go and I look at, say, the 20 to 30-year-olds, right, which network might they go to first? Well, if they're college educated, they might be going to Twitter first. Okay, these days, probably Instagram as well. If you're on a really technical college campus, you may even be going to Reddit. All right, maybe a tool that you don't get to use very often. Those are really, really hopping hubs for social media on college campuses, okay? So those use patterns are really important for you because now, okay, I have an idea of what my audience is. Now I know which tool in the toolbox I can use. The other reason why that whole limitation, social media posting is a pet peeve of mine is because it doesn't identify which tool you should use. It's identifying that you should just use all the tools at once, which is not the case. You don't always want the same message on different tools. Hopefully that's not a surprise to anybody. Okay? The important thing about technographics is that it's closely influenced by demographic triggers. So we could say that this, what did I say he was? 42-year-old male, limited overall technology proficiency, checks social networks once or twice a week, not too frequent, right? So maybe social media is not the tool in your toolbox that you need. Responds well to imagery. He likes to see things. He likes to see the implications of those things and have it explained to him. But he does own a smartphone and has internet access. So maybe a mobile application might be a little bit of a better vessel to use with a push notification if he has those set up, okay? Then we start getting into more targeted analyses, thinking about this one unique group, right, where this guy lives. This leads us to choosing different communications platforms as well as any sort of alert, warnings, or campaign management opportunities. So that's where the advertising comes in, finding out where your return on investment truly is going to live. That'll be an important step. When you start getting into technographics, we start having to identify things about how fast people adopt technology. Anyone ever seen this curve before? A couple people? Awesome. This is probably one of my favorite things to talk about, especially in emergency management because they've never seen anything like this before in their life. And it's probably the most math they've seen in like the last decade as well. I'm a firefighter. I can make jokes about firefighters, okay? So if you're not familiar with this curve, this is kind of the same thing as looking at your technology data over time, how they adopt technology over time. You have 2.5%, a small portion of your usership that are considered innovators. They may not identify with that term, but what they're doing is they're the ones waiting in line for the iPad for 5 days before it came out. They had a smartwatch before it was cool, before they looked nice, and they've had this for a long, long time. The key point with innovators, as opposed to early adopters, is the innovators usually have a little bit more fluid income, and they don't care necessarily that the technology that they adopt won't be relevant in a year, 2 years, 5 years. They just need to be on the cutting edge. That's the most important thing to them, okay? Small group. Any innovators in here? My super nerds?
I'm married to one. Does that count?
You're married to one? Oh yes, that's gotta be expensive. So the next portion of our population are called early adopters. The early adopters have a lot of innovator friends, so maybe you're an early adopter, and they watch the innovators and they say, okay, I don't know about that piece of technology, that one doesn't really seem to make much sense to me, but when they find something that does make sense to them, when they do adopt a piece of technology, they like to tell people. So if you can have an idea where I might fit, right? I like to be in the early adopter category. These are the ones that are the center of the communications. They're your influencers. Okay? They will activate the early majority and the late majority. They do care that the technology lasts, and they want to evangelize to make that happen. Okay? So they talk to the early majority and the late majority. Early majority usually a little bit more skeptical. They want to wait for the kinks to get worked out. Maybe they want an iPhone 6 that doesn't bend in your pocket, or they want their kids to get the upgrade before they do, and so they're just kind of waiting it out, or they just want more people to be involved. Lots of different reasons, obviously, in the early majority and the late majority. When you look at social media adoption widespread in the United States, internet users, we're right about here or so. 78%, I believe, is the last number that I was looking at for social media adoption. And then last, we have the laggards. Any laggards in here? All right, they're usually pretty proud. They're the ones sitting in the corner, and then they'll let you know, all right? Sitting in the corner, you can't make me, I don't like it, I don't want to, okay? And there's nothing wrong with that. We've all been at different places on this curve over time. But the laggards are the ones that are usually 1 or 2 development cycles behind. So when you think about their use cases and which tools in the toolbox you're going to use, these are the people where you might waste a lot of resources trying to connect with, when in reality, who should you be talking to get the message to them?
Early adopters.
The early adopters, right? Because they will activate that message, contextualize it, and make it their own. It will become the community message as opposed to you as the government communicator spewing it out from up on high, okay? So this is how they adopt innovations. This is how they adopt technology. The interesting thing when you start looking at social networks, right, I like to use Paul Revere as an example. You guys know there were 2 riders on that day that Paul Revere did his famous ride? Anyone know the other guy's name? William Dawes, right? Have you guys heard this story? William Dawes did the exact same job that Paul Revere did, but the difference was Paul Revere was an early adopter, William Dawes was more of an innovator. So the innovators have smaller networks of communication, they have smaller social networks. They're still just as important, but when they tell a group, the group doesn't necessarily activate on their own and tell other people. Whereas Paul Revere was interconnected into lots of different types of groups, right? He wasn't just a pundit in one area. He wasn't just a thought leader, for what was he, a silversmith? Is that right? I'm remembering like way back to 4th grade English class or whatever, right? He wasn't just the king of the silversmiths. He knew people all over New England. And so that was how the message spread so fast. And that's why we know Paul Revere as opposed to William Dawes, all right? So clear example of diffusion of innovation.